Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to discuss something that's a bit of a hot button topic. And it's unfortunate, again, that this has come up in the news, but uh, there's a few different reasons I think why this thing was made, and I want to kind of go into some stuff about this and kind of debunk a lot of what is being touted in this documentary that has gone on Netflix that was made and stars Chelsea Handler. Most people would remember her from her talk show that she had on E for many years. And she has made this documentary that is called Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea. And basically, it's a documentary that is meant to explore the idea of white privilege. And this has premiered on Netflix today. And again, this is just something that it's another manifestation of Hollywood's Trump derangement syndrome. Because again, much of this is directed at the president, and much of this is directed in the direction of what basically are perceived to be bad white people or Republicans or conservatives, whatever label you choose to use. For them, it's one umbrella term, basically, as the alt-right. But this is something that is it's troubling, but the point is that Netflix has chosen to pick this up, and I think again this is something that stems out of desperation, and it's something that is interesting considering that we're just coming off the Dave Chappelle special, which I wouldn't say did the opposite, but it very much riled up a lot of people on the left because of the jokes and things that were used by Chappelle, and now you have something that's going on there that is inevitably going to rile up the right. And it feels like Netflix is using, I guess, what you'd call outrage culture in today's day and age. To garner more subscribers and more views on various things. Or at least garner attention towards their platform and away from stuff like Disney. Because, again, Disney isn't really, they haven't, for Disney Plus, they haven't put any of this stuff out there that, oh, we're going to have, this and that. They haven't gone into any of the kind of harder edge stuff. And these are basically two polar and different ends of the spectrum, where you have Dave Chappelle, who's making fun of all this stuff that are considered sensitive topics, and now you have Chelsea Handler, who is again basically kind of operating on the opposite end of the spectrum of oversensitivity, and the idea that white people have a privilege simply because of the color of their skin. Now, there are a few things that come up in the trailer for this that I would like to talk about and debunk a little bit, because the trailer presents them in somewhat of a dishonest light. And also just to kind of talk about Handler herself and how this is kind of, I don't know if this is some kind of a personal therapy for her or what, but let's just go into this. So Chelsea Handler fully admitted she is a victim, or perceives herself to be a victim of Trump derangement syndrome. She has stated that after the 2016 election she went to therapy, and I presume is still going to therapy, again, if she's making something like this. And this is what inevitably starts to happen, is that eventually, when people become depressed, a lot of the time they look in on themselves and they don't really like themselves. And this appears to be somewhat of a manifestation of that. Again, I'm not saying that necessarily that Chelsea Handler suffers from depression, but in terms of tackling your own demons, this is actually the opposite of what you would want to do. The idea of tackling your demons should be, and that's kind of the thing with depression, is that if because it appears that she's handling it in an unhealthy manner. Again, I'm making the assumption that she's suffering from some form of depression, but if you're handling that in the wrong way, you grow to hate yourself. And that's not what it should be. You should be coming to terms with things that you may not like, but you might not necessarily have control over, like the color of your skin. And this is the idea of white privilege, is to say that because you are born a certain way, you have to treat other people who are not born the same as you differently, than you would any other person, because specifically of the color of your skin. Now, that is counterintuitive to the idea of equality. And this is something that is a bit different. There's a difference between equality and equity. Equality means there's a level playing field, everybody plays on it, and if something unfair happens to you, it happens, and you have to move on with it. With equity, if you are deemed to be a class that, or if you're deemed to be part of a class that maybe doesn't, people don't think get as much as other classes, then you're given things that other people are not given, and there is favoritism. Now, these are both terms that have been thrown around a lot, but the thing is that Chelsea Handler has proven in recent memory, especially since 2016, that she is not in a very good mental place. She has stated this on multiple occasions, and I think this is less an idea that she actually agrees with white privilege, and it is more of an idea that she is having problems dealing with other mental issues. And this is a manifestation of that. Now, again, most of this stuff is on record, and a lot of the things that she mentions in the promotional stuff for this documentary, it can have a number of holes poked in it very easily, and that's a problem where when you look at one side of a scenario and you don't take into account other things, then it looks one way when in reality it's not. Now, one of the things that she brings up is there was an incident, several incidents involving a boyfriend that she had when she was in high school named, I believe it was Tayshawn. And after a while, he wound up going to prison, and she went to Hollywood. And she cites this as a main example of her white privilege. Now, in the same blurb, she also admits that Tayshawn was a heroin dealer, that he had weed on him on multiple occasions and was arrested by the police, and that she ratted him out on several occasions to the police, and she was let go. Now, here's the thing. If you take into consideration that at the time, I don't quote me on this, but I'm assuming he was probably a bit older than her. Maybe he was 18 or 19. I believe she was in what she stated that she was 16, maybe 17, and she probably did not have a criminal record, or didn't have a significant one with any kind of drug or narcotics arrests. But he probably did, because he was a heroin dealer. And most of the time when people are doing that type of stuff, you don't just jump in and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a heroin dealer today." You start off doing other shit, and then eventually you get to the point where you are dealing heroin, or you're dealing other types of hard drugs. And chances are he was probably arrested on a few other occasions for narcotics related stuff, and he had a police record when he was caught with these other substances. And eventually he got nailed for something that was probably heroin, and he was sent to jail. Now, Chelsea Handler chose to go on and wound up developing an acting and a career in show business, and went out to Hollywood. I don't think that had anything to do with her being white. The fact that he went to jail had nothing to do with her being white. It had everything to do with the fact that he was a drug dealer. Or it probably had a lot to do with the fact that he was a drug dealer. Now, can I rule out the fact that maybe there was some kind of a racial bias, or maybe they didn't think, maybe subconsciously they thought, oh, it's this blonde white girl, she's with this guy, she doesn't really know him, which may have actually been the case, but yes, there could have been something maybe subconsciously or consciously going on there, but you can't rule out the facts that this guy probably had a criminal record, and he was a known heroin dealer, and she ratted him out. That's the other thing. When you rat somebody else out to the cops, especially somebody who's doing stuff like dealing heroin or dealing other hard drugs, a lot of the times the cops will let you off easy, because you were willing to rat that other person out, even if you might be guilty of something, because in the end, you're helping them out. So there's an example there. The other thing is that you kind of go into this, you go down this whole rabbit hole where she starts talking about the whole reason behind this whole documentary was to try and teach her how to be a better white person. Um, or how to be a better white person in relation to the treatment of colored people. Now, the other thing is that most of the advertising for this that I've seen and the blurbs from Chelsea Handler mainly focus on the African American community. They do not focus on a lot of other minorities. I Again, they don't mention that they touch on Hispanics or Asians or any other denominational nationality that exists in the United States or any other major one. They mainly just focus on African Americans. And here's the other thing is that if you start going into those other minorities, you'll see that some of them are a bit better off than others. You see that, especially the Asian minority, they have, in terms of aggregate wealth, they're actually a lot wealthier than white people overall. If you take, the same sample size from Asians and white people, and you take the percentages, even though there are a lot more wealthy white people than there are Asians in America, the percentages are drastically higher for Asian Americans. So there's a lot of numbers that you can dissect with this that don't really add up to the ideas that she's pushing across. And there's another part that you see in some of the advertising that has to do with she's interviewing a woman and she's saying that you have privilege because you can track your ancestors to the kings and queens of Europe and things like that, and we can't figure out where we came from. And it's an allusion to the idea that because a large portion of the African Americans in the United States were brought over here as slaves before the Civil War, that they can't trace their families back, to personally, in a sense. They can probably trace them back to the area at this point because of the DNA testing we have, but they can't trace back to individuals because the records weren't kept or anything like that, because a lot of it was just they didn't have written records and things like that. So that's the other problem, both with the idea of white privilege and the idea that she's trying to get across, is that you can't control something that happened before you were born. And it's the idea, we don't choose who our parents are. We don't choose the households that we're born into. We don't choose, we don't even choose our own names. Our parents do that for us. And to tell somebody that your great-great-grandfather, somebody that existed 100 years before you were even born, did something bad and that's your fault, and I'm going to pass that fault down to you, is ridiculous. And it should be ridiculous to anybody that has, any form of common sense. But because we've gone down this rabbit hole of the idea that because you're white and because you're privileged, you owe something to other people who are not white, now that comes into play, because that's a valid enough excuse for a lot of people to say that, okay, now I need to do this and that. The way that everything in this country has worked for a number of years is that everybody is on an equal playing field, in the sense that when you start out, you can go up and you can go down. And it is for the most part, it is entirely dependent on you as a person what happens. We've heard plenty of stories where people leave the hood, where people leave downtrodden and horrible communities and they make something of themselves. And at the same time, we've heard people that are filthy rich who wind up, broke and living in a box. You can go from one extreme to the other. It is possible. Now, is it unlikely in some scenarios? Yes. But to go down the way and say that you have issues with somebody specifically because of their skin color, it more or less has to do with class. If you want to make the argument, it would have to do with class. But to make the argument that simply because you were born with a certain skin color, and you owe something to other people because you were born with that skin color, is a terrible argument to make. It's a terrible argument to bring up, and it's a dangerous argument to push in a lot of cases. And again, I think Netflix picked this documentary up because they knew it was going to stir things up. I think they picked it up because they knew that it was going to cause a visceral reaction in the opposite direction to what Dave Chappelle did, so that you would actually get a strong knee-jerk reaction from both sides of the aisle, and that was their plan. That's why this was released right now. I think that is why this was released right now, because the Dave Chappelle outrage is starting to die down, and then this thing comes out, and now you have all the right-wing news outlets going on about this. So now you have both sides riled up, and everybody's paying attention to Netflix. It's a publicity stunt. This entire thing was a publicity stunt. Now, do I think Chelsea Handler thinks it's a publicity stunt? No, I think she legitimately thinks this because I think that she's having mental problems. But in the sense that Netflix used that to try and garner viewership, I think is a legitimate claim. Now, as for what this means going forward, it just means Netflix is desperate. They know they know they're fighting a losing battle against Disney Plus, and they know they're going to have to push the envelope if they want to try and keep people on the platform and keep their subscription numbers high. And if they don't do it, then they're going to go out of business because Disney is going to push them out, and a lot of the other streaming services are starting to catch up to them. And this whole thing relates back to the streaming war, like a lot of stuff that has been getting put out on those streaming services lately. And I can say the same thing about Dave Chappelle too. I think they knew the content that Dave Chappelle was going to put out there in the special, and they said, yes, we want to air this because we know it's going to rile people up and we know it's going to make people pay attention. And I think that is ultimately what it is they are using Chelsea Handler and Dave Chappelle as these little carrots that are being held in front of the donkeys to make them keep going. And as far as we can tell, it's working because the news outlets have been picking these things up and they've been running with them, and people have been making videos of them, again, kind of like what I'm doing now. But all the arguments are being brought up and being presented because these things are being put out on Netflix, and we're all talking about Netflix. In the end, we're all talking about Netflix. So that's just my opinion, is that this entire thing is Netflix orchestrating one massive publicity stunt. And if they keep doing stuff like this, I have a funny feeling that people are going to catch on eventually. Or people are going to get tired of it eventually. And ultimately, it's a short-term tactic to try and get a spike in viewership before Disney Plus comes out. And I'd be curious to see if there's another thing that's going to come out in the future that might garner similar attention from them. But only time will tell in that sense. But that's my opinion on this entire thing, and my opinion on the what I've seen of the special so far. But I want to know what your opinion is. Do you think that this type of thing exists? Are you interested in watching this documentary? Do you believe that Chelsea Handler's opinions on this are valid? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Again, I'd like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?